Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. So today we're going to unpack this brilliant little short story that actually reveals some incredibly powerful truths about how we see the world. As humans, we are constantly observing our surroundings, right? And more often than not, our brains just absolutely rush to tell us a story about what we're looking at. But how often is that story actually true? And how often is it really just our own internal emotional baggage kind of being projected onto the canvas of the real world? Well, today we're looking at a story that captures this exact psychological phenomenon perfectly.
But before we jump in, I want you to ask yourself a question, because it's really at the heart of the journey we're about to take. Have you ever let your feelings completely rewrite the facts of a situation? Think about it. Maybe a time when you were absolutely convinced of something. Like maybe you thought a friend was mad at you, or a situation was just completely falling apart, only to discover later that you had, totally misread the room. Your feelings were real, for sure, but they completely rewrote the factual reality of what was going on. Just keep that memory in the back of your mind as we go through today's explainer.
All right, Section 1, A Walk in Bruges, setting the scene. Let's dive right into this beautiful story featuring a father, his daughter Adja, and a simple morning stroll that honestly turns into a pretty profound life lesson.
So our story begins with a father, referred to as Papa, and his young daughter Adja. They're visiting the historic, breathtaking city of Bruges for a week, and every morning they take a stroll through this local park. Now, I want you to really picture this setting, okay? Because this isn't just any park. It's pristine. It is flawlessly maintained. There's this lovely river flowing right nearby. You've got swans elegantly swimming in the canals. The crisp morning air is super refreshing, and the grass beneath their feet is literally dotted with these beautiful, small Edelweiss flowers. They're walking through this incredibly idyllic, perfectly manicured environment. I mean, everything about this setting just screams care, attention, and thriving life.
Which brings us to Section 2, The Drooping Tree. An emotional observation. Because amidst all this absolute perfection, Adja spots something that breaks her heart and triggers a super strong, immediate emotional reaction.
Right in the middle of their walk, Adja points to a specific tree and asks her dad, "Why doesn't anyone water that tree? See, it's drooping always." She looks at the long, hanging branches of this tree, and she just immediately feels this deep sense of sadness. Feeling terrible for the tree, she assumes it's being completely neglected by the locals. She sees the physical characteristic, the drooping, and her mind instantly connects it to withering, thirst, neglect, the whole shebang. In her mind, she's already diagnosed the problem and assigned the blame. Nobody is watering it. Now, her father could have just immediately corrected her, right? But instead, he uses this as a teaching moment to prompt her to look a little closer and question that initial sadness. He just replies simply, "Maybe. Why didn't you look it up?" He really wants her to investigate her own assumption here. So over the next evening and into the following morning, Adja keeps noticing the tree, and she's still feeling that lingering sadness for it. But the real question remains, was the tree actually dying?
So let's look at Section 3, Feelings versus Facts. The reality check. What happens next is a brilliant lesson in separating our internal emotions from external reality. Papa finally decides to step in and offer the context that Adja is missing.
Papa explains that the tree isn't dying at all. It is simply a weeping willow. Drooping is just, what it does. It's a classic tree, one you'll actually find mentioned a lot in Old English literature. And its long, hanging branches are its natural, totally healthy state. Papa gently points out to her, it is like this only. So the very thing Adja thought was a symptom of this tragic neglect was actually just the tree's natural identity.
And this is where it gets really amazing. Adja takes a few photos of the tree and suddenly notices this small plaque situated right near it. The plaque reveals a staggering number, 800 years. No way, right? This tree hasn't just been surviving, it has literally been thriving in this exact spot for 8 centuries.
There's just a stark contrast here. On the one hand, you have Adja's assumption, right? She crafted this tragic narrative that the tree was unwatered, neglected, dying. But then you have the actual factual reality. It's an 800-year-old weeping willow. Plus, Papa points out the glaring environmental clues she just missed entirely. Remember the setting we talked about? There was a river flowing right nearby. There was no physical way this tree lacked water. He asks her, logically, why would the people of this city, who keep the grass perfect and the canals pristine without a single spot of garbage, suddenly decide to neglect one single tree? The facts were completely contradictory to her feelings.
Moving on to Section 4, The Projection Trap, Why We Misinterpret. Adja immediately recognizes her error. She notes how perfect the Edelweiss flowers are and totally agrees she was wrong. Papa then guides her to understand exactly why her mind jumped to such a negative conclusion in the first place.
Papa delivers this incredibly insightful thought. He says, based on your knowledge and your feelings, you interpreted things. But before interpreting, ask yourself, do you have sufficient knowledge to interpret it correctly? This right here is the absolute core takeaway of our explainer today. Feeling an emotion does not automatically grant you the factual knowledge required to judge a situation. Adya had the feeling of empathy, sure, but she totally lacked the botanical knowledge of what a weeping willow actually was. She interpreted without sufficient data.
But why did she jump straight to neglect while Papa asks her to think about why she cast doubts on the meticulous people of Bruges? And Adja has this moment of just wonderful self-awareness. She realizes she was projecting. She says, maybe because I feel bad for the plants that are planted and wither every season in our area. She took the reality of her hometown, where plants regularly wither and die, and she projected that exact same narrative onto a completely different, totally healthy environment. She basically let her past experiences and localized sadness blind her to the thriving reality right in front of her.
So this builds a really great framework we can all use to avoid this projection trap in our own daily lives. Think of it as a 3-step process. Step 1, notice your feelings without judgment. Look, Aj's empathy wasn't a bad thing. Feeling bad for a dying tree is a kind emotion. The problem wasn't the feeling itself, it was what she did next. And that brings us to Step 2, assess if you have actual knowledge of the facts. This is where you pause and ask, wait, do I actually know what kind of tree this is? Have I noticed the massive river literally right next to it? You look for the data. And finally, Step 3, interpret the situation based on reality, not assumptions. Only after gathering the facts do you allow yourself to draw a conclusion about what's actually happening.
All right, Section 5, Learning Beyond the Lens, the true purpose of travel. Papa wraps up their morning stroll by expanding this realization into a much broader philosophy about experiencing the world, especially when we step outside our everyday routines. He tells Adya that when we travel overseas, or really anywhere new for that matter, we must look to learn and bring good things back to our own place. He specifically reminds her that these visits aren't just about, making reels or snapping quick photos for social media. The true value of being in a new environment goes way, way beyond superficial consumption. If you walk through a historic city just looking for a cool background for your selfie, you're going to completely miss the 800-year-old lessons standing right next to you. The one who truly wants to learn can learn a lot. And Adya happily gets the point. She openly acknowledges she let her feelings completely overtake the facts, and she fully absorbs the lesson about needing sufficient knowledge before making judgments. And then, having traded her sad assumption for genuine appreciation of this incredible 800-year-old marvel of nature, she says, now it's time for a selfie with the weeping willow. So she still takes her picture, but now she's capturing a moment of true understanding, not just some blind assumption.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought to reflect on. Where in your own life might you be letting feelings overtake the facts? Are you looking at a perfectly healthy weeping willow in your career, your relationships, or maybe your personal goals and assuming it's dying simply because you're projecting your own past anxieties onto it? Before you make your next big judgment, remember to look around for the river, read the plaque, and ensure you actually have the knowledge to see things as they truly are. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep learning.